Local and national environmental justice organizations are criticizing plans by Formosa to build a massive petrochemical complex in St. James Parish. And now the United Nations is chiming in with a panel of human rights experts calling the plan environmental racism. In a statement, UN human rights experts say in part, this form of environmental racism form a serious and disproportionate threat to the enjoyment of several human rights of its largely African American residents, including the right to equality and non-discrimination, the right to life, the right to health, right to an adequate standard of living, and cultural rights. UN experts are calling on the U.S. government to deliver environmental justice in communities across America, starting with St. James Parish. The proposed petrochemical plant is said to be the largest plastic facility in the world. We attempted to get a comment from Governor John Bel Edwards, but we haven't heard back just yet. But you can read that full statement from the UN on our website.